Good morning. Thank you for joining me on today's live webinar. The topic being removal of minor children from the Republic of South Africa. Interesting topic. And with that, we're dealing with the issue concerning passport consent. I have 3 questions which were sent to us previously, and I will deal with those questions. But to put you in the light as to how this topic falls into the realm of family law, in terms of our law, if a child wants to leave the Republic of South Africa, or you want to remove a child from the Republic of South Africa, both parents' consent is required, both guardians' consent is required. And at the same time, if a child wants to apply for a passport, both guardians' consent is required. So that's a legal basis, and obviously, because of that, people may have problems where one party does not want to give consent, and that's where this topic falls in. Removal of minor children from the Republic of South Africa and passport consent. Let us deal with the first question. Apologies. I want to relocate to Canada with my minor child of 8 years. The father is not involved in the child's life at all. Do I still require his consent for the relocation? We have been divorced for the past 6 years. He does not pay maintenance despite the consent paper. If I may unpack that specific question, the parties were obviously married and they got divorced. In terms of the consent paper, there was an order dealing with the parental rights. It stipulates that the father should pay maintenance. He doesn't pay child maintenance, and he has been missing for the last few years. Now the mother wants to relocate to Canada. The question is, must she obtain the father's consent? Because the parties were married to each other, and there's a consent paper, and so on, I can only presume, unless a court order says something else. But in normal circumstances, if a party was married and they got divorced, both parents will retain parental rights and responsibilities of guardianship. Meaning that in this specific example, the father's consent would be required. He had full parental rights and responsibilities over the minor child while they were married, and they divorced. Usually, and 99% of the time, 99.9% of the time, the parties will retain that. I never saw a situation where the divorce court took away the other parent's guardianship rights. It's possible, it happens in normal type of applications where the parties might have been married, they have divorced, both parties have guardianship rights, and the party applies afterwards to have the guardianship rights or limit the guardianship rights of the other party. Nonetheless, in my scenario, I presume the father still has parental rights and responsibilities. For the Pacific mother who posed this question, unfortunately, you will have to ask the father for the consent for the relocation of the minor child to Canada. If he does not provide you with the necessary consent, then unfortunately, you would have to approach the court, the High Court in this specific case, and the court will obviously make an order if the court believes it is in a minor child's best interest, for an order that the father's consent is dispensed with. Basically, the court will stipulate that the mother can relocate to Canada, and in the order it will stipulate that any issues regarding the traveling to Canada and the relocation to Canada, where the father's consent would be required, because he is a co-guardian of the minor child, that specific consent would be dispensed with. On that specific issue, and further advice to the specific mother that posed this question, seeing that the father is not willing to give consent, or he may give consent, but should he not be willing to give consent, and you're forced to approach the court for that specific order, you need to be creative, or your lawyers will have to be creative, in the sense of, should you be in Canada and you have to enroll the minor child into a school, obtain medical procedures or medical treatment, whatever the case may be, where guardian's consent is required, Canada will say, where's the father's, where's the other parents' consent? Those specific authorities will ask you that question. Unless you have an order stipulating that, no, the High Court in South Africa provided me with sole guardianship rights when the minor child is in Canada, you will have problems. The default of that would be you will have to contact the father each time in South Africa for him to provide the necessary consent. I hope that deals with that specific question, and if I did not answer it, feel free to leave a comment in the Advocate Mohammed Abdullah Facebook page. Question number 2. My child has been chosen to represent his school in the USA for karate. He does not have a passport. What do I do if the father does not want to go with me to Home Affairs? Okay, so the parties, I presume, are separated. I presume both parties have co-guardianship rights over the minor child. The father has no issue with the child going to the USA. He's most probably not involved in the child's life, so he doesn't really care. And in the same way, in the same breath, he does not want to assist the mother for the child to obtain a passport. It could be because of the issues the parties have, or he's just nonchalant and he doesn't care. In terms of the Children's Act, both guardians' consent is required for an application for a passport for a minor child. That's very important to note. Under these circumstances, the father's consent would be required. He should go with the minor child and the mother to the Department of Home Affairs and consent for the issuing of a passport for the minor child. For the same, as I mentioned earlier on, if the father does not want to consent or cooperate, the mother unfortunately will have to approach the court for an order that the father's consent for the application for a passport be dispensed with. Is not required. Unfortunately, that needs to be done, and it is a high court application. Again, it can be very expensive. The best thing to do is, if I was his mother, speak to the father in a nice way, say, I'll send an Uber down, I'll make it worth your while, in the sense of, buy him lunch, whatever the case may be, as opposed to going to court. But should you go to court and you are forced now to spend money on legal fees, or if you do it yourself, that's also possible, then you might want to ask the court for additional powers or limit the father's guardianship rights, because here you have to approach the court for something important for the minor child, like an application for a passport for the child to go overseas. The father, in this specific scenario, he might agree on paper for the child to go overseas, but tomorrow he may be asked to consent to something else regarding guardianship rights for the minor child. Then the mother must approach the High Court again, or the Pacific relevant court again. So the mother, under these circumstances, might want to be creative, or as I mentioned earlier, the lawyers might have to be creative and structure the order to deal with future problems that may arise because of the father's apathy when it comes to the minor child's best interest. I hope I answered that question for question number 2. The third question, let's deal with that. The father of my child lives in Egypt. What do I do if I want to apply for a passport for my daughter and visit my family in Saudi Arabia? The father's name is on the birth certificate. Okay, challenging one because the father is overseas. Long story short, you'll have to approach the court again, the High Court again. The difficulty here is that you cannot serve somebody in Egypt. You'll require the court's consent. They call it a legal citation application, but the court might make an order that you can email the documentation to the father you can serve the documentation to the father via email and a legal citation application. Once you've done that and the court gave you consent to serve the documentation on the father via email or maybe WhatsApp or via Facebook, I do not know, whatever creative means that are in existence, the court will now deal with the matter, and the court can make an order regarding the father's consent no longer being required for the minor child to visit Saudi Arabia or to obtain a passport. I hope I've answered these questions adequately, and thank you for watching this video. Have a lovely day.